Welcome to Talent Talks. On episode 2, we will be discussing Gen Z in the workforce with Alanah Phillips. Alanah comes to us as not only a recruiter, a speaker, an industry troublemaker, as she's also the founder of Advisor Launch Lab and Break Up with Your Broker Dealer. We're excited to hear from Alanah.
Hi, and welcome back to Talent Talks. I'm Kim, one of your co-hosts, and today we are joined with our other co-host, Morgan, and a very special guest of ours, Alanah Phillips. Alanah, welcome to our lovely little podcast here.
Thank you for having me. It seems like it's going to be a fun conversation.
Yes, we like to have fun here at Recruit. Don't take things too serious. But anywho, super excited to have you on the show here with us. I was originally referred to you from another very good friend of mine, Teresa Fitzgerald, remember?
Mm-hmm.
So Teresa's one of the queen of networkers. So we always love her introductions. And gosh, we've known each other now for what, 6 months, 8 months, something like that. I feel like it's been a minute.
I think it's been, at least 8 months.
So I'm really excited to get into our talk today. We're really talking about Gen Z in the workforce. This is something, you were part of a phenomenal organization for such a long time, and you decided to go off on your own. And you have been seen a little bit more as, this expert. You've been a part of some very wonderful organizations. So I would just love to hear a little bit of what made you kind of start your companies, I guess you could say, and tell us a little bit about them. And then we'll get into some of these questions.
For sure. So I have been in financial services for 8 years. I have been recruiting for probably 12 or 13 in some capacity. So that has allowed me the opportunity to interview with and network and meet lots of different types of candidates in different industries as well. But I had been both at the beginning of my career at an insurance broker dealer, training brand new advisors. And so I spent a lot of time then going to college campuses, talking to students, trying to introduce them to careers in financial services, and then managing them, working with them through licensing, getting them onto teams, and helping them through the first few years of their careers as a financial advisor. And the other part of my time at that firm, I focused on recruiting experienced financial advisors who were, 10, 20, 30 years in the business and navigating their career changes. So now I do both of those things on my own, tapping into that experience. So Advisor Launch Lab, we help to hire, train, and retain next generations of financial planning practice. So bringing in whatever your next gen is. So if you are a solo advisor and you're bringing in your first person, they could be in their 40s or 50s potentially. If you already have G2, maybe we're working on G3, and that's where we definitely get into this Gen Z millennial crowd that's coming into our business. And then the other side of my business, Break Up with Your Broker Dealer, is helping those experienced advisors navigate the changes that they're making, when they should leave a firm, where they should go, and how they should go.
Yeah. So you're really the go-to when it comes to think about, is this the right firm for me? What other opportunities are there out there? But also I'm looking to grow, and specifically with like a junior advisor type of person, correct? It's not really staff. It's more so teaching that advisor side, and you literally take all the training and everything and get them up and ready to go, right?
Yeah.
So.
Unfortunately, it's not all me, because I'm good at certain types of training or certain parts of the process, but I have awesome partners who were financial advisors. They're recovering now and helping to train those new folks on some of the more technical things or sharing their experience with them. So yes, we are purely focused on advisors. I call myself an advisor advocate, really is like my title over whatever other titles we have to put on stuff, because at my core, I think that explains what I do best.
Yeah, I like that. Advisor advocate. Great.
When you describe Generation Z, tell us a little bit about the characteristics or values of Gen Z. Like how can we kind of identify what those types of candidates or that generation of candidate is looking for?
Sure. So I think there are a lot of myths around the next generation, millennials and Gen Z. Do we want to start there before I dive into some of the other stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a presentation that I take out to conferences of financial advisors, and we actually like play a little game of Family Feud from the stage. And I ask them, like, I've surveyed 100 teams, like, what are the top myths
Yeah.
that we think about this next generation? So I'll put you on the spot. What do you think some of the things that they say are?
Hmm.
They're not hard workers.
Oh yeah, you're nailing it. Yeah, this is it.
Uh, I was gonna say lazy.
100%. Yep.
What is that word called? Where
Entitled.
Entitled. I was like, I know you're gonna get there. Yeah, I'll save you the trouble. These are the exact things on my presentation slide, and every single audience of financial advisors. So these are the senior folks, right?
Okay.
Say those same three things.
Mm.
So they're lazy, they're entitled, they don't like to work, they can't sell. That's another one. There's, a handful of little other stories we'll hear in the process of this, but every audience says these same things, right? So I love to start here because I think these myths are truly myths, right? And through the course of that presentation, I break down why I think these things are untrue. But I think it's important to acknowledge we have these stigmas already around this next generation. There's a quote by Plato, and I'm going to botch it, but it's like something about, and he doesn't say what he's talking about. You have to read it in context to understand, but that it will implant forgetfulness in their souls. They will cease to exercise memory because they rely on that which is written. And he was talking about reading, right? Like reading was going to be the downfall of the generation coming after Plato, right? Like they're so lazy and entitled because they're using these books instead of remembering things, right? Like, who do they think they are, these lazy and entitled next generation after Plato, right? So like so many of these myths are the same things that every generation in the history of forever thought about the generation coming after them. And I truly believe it is, when we actually start to break those myths down, which we can, talk about today, it is the same as the caveman who invented the wheel being upset and calling his kids entitled for riding bikes with that wheel that he invented.
If only he knew about the internet. I don't know.
I think he'd be very upset about ChatGPT and all the AI tools we're using.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, so I swear I've lived in, major cities in my life, and now, outside of a city, and I still put on GPS no matter what I do.
Me too. Yeah.
How did my sense of direction go elsewhere? It just makes life easier. But I felt the same way. I'm like, how did we go out in high school with no cell phone? I'm dating here, but that's what it was.
And how lazy and entitled are you that you can't read a map anymore or don't know how to get somewhere using cardinal directions? Yeah.
I won't go down. I was like, I could go down a tangent with that, but I'm not going to. We'll pull it back here. We're here for a reason, right?
I can talk about some of the characteristics of the Gen Z folks if you want me to, though.
I'd love to hear
that. Yeah, let's go for it.
There are, outside of, and again, I say all of this a little facetiously because there are some things that are different about them, right? And I think the other important context here, and Kim, I love the example of the maps on your phone, right? Because when I was learning how to drive, I had a printed map in my glove box, like,
right.
And if I got lost, which happened a few times, I had to go figure out on that map how to get back to where I needed to go. And I never do that today. I don't even know how to get to Target. I just plug it into my GPS. But the world has changed, right? So I think from the, folks that are in our industry that are boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, things have definitely shifted in our world. So do you know how long Google has been in existence?
20 years.
I'm going to ask like almost 30.
Very close. Yeah. Google's 26 years old. So many of the financial advisors who are in our world were not Googleable. They didn't have Google to search for things when they started in the business. can you imagine what your day would look like without Google?
No.
I've
No.
used it 15 times today probably, and it's
Yeah.
not even noon, right? Another thing that has changed, cold calling is a big part of our business, right? In 2008, it took 3.6 attempts to reach somebody via cold call. Today, it takes 8. So
There's
more than double
more
that,
than one.
right? So how different is that in terms of when you were building your practice
Yeah.
26 years ago versus today? And
Mhm.
now we've got these 26 and younger coming into the business, and our world has changed, right? So I say all those things to say they're digital natives. They've
Mhm.
always had Google. They've always had these tools that we're talking about and the tech that we all use every day now. They've always had that. They grew up with supercomputers in their pockets. That changes your
Mhm.
access to information and your ability to do things with it. They're the most educated generation of all. They're going to college at a higher degree or getting degrees at a higher percentage than previous generations. I always like to point out they're not the job hoppers. That's actually Gen X. If we compare at similar ages who was moving jobs, Gen X was actually worse. And the millennial crew has started more new businesses than any other generation that were successful sooner than expected, right? So there's all of these different dynamics that are different about generations. Gen Z is a little more politically active. They're very interested in things that affect them that they need to take action on, like climate change. They have this belief that work-life balance is important and aligning with their values. So there's definitely some trends around them, but I think most of it goes back to the things that have changed our world that have also changed how many of us interact with our world today too.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can you just clarify for everybody too, because sometimes I always forget Gen Z, the years.
Yeah, I'm going to pause for a second because I want to actually pull up the exact for each of these.
Let me Google it.
Those millennials are 1981 to 1996 roughly, so they're 28 to 43. And Gen Z, we're talking about like 12 to 27.
Okay, that's helpful.
So it's interesting. One thing that we teach in our FFTA program, which is like a recruiting program that we put on with Hoopus Performance Network, we talk about some of the disconnects in the interview process. This really aligns with that millennial, different generations, baby boomer generation, and just specifically the disconnect in communication styles too.
Yeah.
Do you have any pointers for someone who may be in that later stage in their career looking to hire the Generation Z? What pointers do you have for them? Just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd be curious, what are some of the things that you hear in terms of differences of communication styles?
One of them that I see a lot, very interestingly, is their email was not proper, because oftentimes emails are sent as if it's a text.
Mm-hmm.
Email. I understand I would prefer more of a professional email, especially when you deal with clients, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Would you out that person because of that, or would you be open to giving that feedback? Another one too is even just like the look. Sometimes people are coming in a little bit more casual into an interview.
Yep.
Versus the suit and tie or, business dress on the female side. So like those are a little bit more on the surface level, I would say, not necessarily in terms of talent, but it's more of impression.
Yes.
Do you see others? I mean, those are just two off the top of my head, but
I mean, I don't remember when we were teaching that aspect, what the differences were, but I think there's definitely a little bit more of the approach to interviewing or finding a job is just a little bit different. You know what I mean? For me, to ask a candidate, send a thank you note, they're like, yeah, I emailed them. I'm like, no, I'm talking about get a pen and paper and write it. And they're like, oh,
yeah.
I mean, they're about to even ask me, where do I get the paper? Where do I get the pen from?
Yeah. I love this. These are, I don't know that I dig into this as much in some of the other conversations that I have, like asking what people are hearing with this, but it's the same stuff I hear from teams that are often deciding not to move forward with a candidate because of these things, which I think is really dangerous. And
Right.
it's the reason that I start with what I do on that myth busting, on the perspective giving, the every generation, the history forever, and how the world has changed. Because I think even though this generation, well, I interact with hundreds of these college-aged students, and I think they're so wildly impressive, right? The interactions that I have with them, especially like women in business is a group I talk to a lot, and they're just stellar. That doesn't mean that there aren't folks who, although they're digital natives and they've got all this information and access to it, it doesn't mean they know exactly what to do with it, right? So they may not yet, because they're still in their early 20s, they may not yet have developed that professional acumen, the understanding of how to behave in some of these settings, or what's expected in those settings is maybe a better way to say it, because I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with some of the things that you're describing. So I think this is where I always come back to the senior folks who are in the hiring position. I've made all these mistakes in hiring, by the way, too. We had a young woman that we had interviewed. This is years and years ago. I was first running the intern program, and she had come in to interview with us, and she was wearing flats to the interview. And two of my counterparts were like, like making their notes, like, she wore flats to this interview. Like, can you believe, like, how unprofessional, right? I've got 100 other of these stories, like polo shirts, where they parked in the parking lot, the color of their hair, they do stupid things like say, sell me this pen, and then people answer weird.
Oh, God.
There's so many of these things that we do that we're like judging, but there's not necessarily any utility to this, because somebody wearing flats or somebody being casual in email, these are things that can change. Those are things that can be coached if that's not the vibe of your practice, right? But I would guess most practices, sometimes you're casual in email, and learning when to be casual and not is an important EQ skill. Probably you wear flats. Not everybody's wearing heels anymore. At least I certainly hope not, because I've stopped. And people still think of me as a professional person, probably in most settings. But I think evaluating really how important is this thing to their ability to do a good job at the role that I need them to do. And usually it's silly stuff that doesn't matter. And it's things that we can coach on if necessary, because it may not be necessary if that doesn't actually affect their ability to do the job.
You know what I would do too is I would tell them to manage their own expectations, right? And specifically, when you graduated or when you were 24, how did you act? And we all of a sudden get amnesia and we forget what happened and how we were. One of my bosses in the industry, he will self-admittedly tell this story that on his interview for an internship, but which he was hired for, he came in boat shoes, like some sort of like just completely different, very, very casual outfit. And he's like, I just can't believe they hired me, but I mean, that still happens today, but people forget that
we all did it.
Not,
We all were 22 at one point and didn't quite know how to act. And you know what? A bunch of y'all don't know how to act now. So there's definitely some cognitive dissonance or some short-term memory loss there of like, everyone in the history of forever did these silly things when they were interviewing for their first jobs.
And the other thing too, like just thinking about that is, one of the challenges that we will come across is some of our clients are like, well, I want this person to be professional, to have this experience, to do this, to this, to this. They want the world, but they want to say what an entry-level person would be at. I'm sure across that too, Alanah. So I think that's all part of that, manage your own expectations. Like, hey, if you do want to hire somebody potentially that learned this in school, but you only want to pay an entry level type of salary, well, then you have to be willing to train people on this stuff. And if you're not, then you need to go back to the drawing table and really sit here and figure out what you need.
Yeah, this is another area where I see teams forget a thing that, like, again, Google exists. And so I know one of the teams I worked with in Maryland, I use this story often to illustrate this, had like 5 or 6 different interns, right? And they made one of them the team an offer for this one to join them officially, right? And not be an intern anymore. And so she took the offer that they gave her and went to the other interns and told them about it. And then they all went out and got their offers from their teams, and they got in a room and they compared their offers, and they went on Google and they went on Glassdoor, and then they all went back and negotiated for more, right? And the senior advisors are pissed about this because these entitled millennials and Gen Zers are coming in here asking for more money. But I asked all of them post this happening, like, let's just look at what happened, right? Like, one, you forgot that they have the internet and all the information is out there. Like, I'm sorry that you didn't have access to that information when you were saying yes to the deals that you took years ago. I'm sorry about that. But everything that they did in that story, they were resourceful. They used their network connections. They did research. They negotiated. Like, these are skills of people that we want to have on our team.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. I mean, I love that. And what did those advisors say when you talk? I'm just very curious. How did they respond to that?
I think they're still a little miffed about it. And again, this is another trend. And I'm sorry for the people who are listening and feel personally attacked. I want you to a little bit so that you evaluate, why do we think that because something happened to us, because we didn't have access to the tools, because we took a bad deal, because we didn't have all the information, that somehow that needs to happen for these folks? Like, that's not a cute thing when we do that to people. Like, again, I'm sorry you didn't have Google. I'm sorry you didn't ask anyone what they were getting paid. These Gen Z and millennial folks are researching, coming back to negotiate, and they don't know how to do it professionally. You know, they're botching some of that negotiation piece, but they know what they're worth, and they know what other people are getting paid, and they know whether they should accept an offer or not. And you're the one who looks silly for undercutting them.
Right.
That's all part of that employee value proposition that we talk about all the time here at Recruit.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about some of that stuff too, and just kind of taking a little very quick step back here, Alanah, when we were talking about the characteristics that help define Gen Z and everything, what about some characteristics that you feel like are similar to across generations? What have you seen?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's some of the stuff we've talked about, of just like, everyone when they were young made silly mistakes. Like, you were still learning how to be a professional person. You were learning how to communicate professionally. You were trying to figure out who you were and what you wanted. You didn't always think before you speak. So I think, again, those are all things that connect all of us. The unique things about this generation that I think they bring to the table, though, is they're extremely tech savvy. They are social media experts. That myth about them not being able to sell, like, they invented social selling. So you are making cold calls one-to-one. They're posting to audiences of thousands in the same amount of time. They're pretty quick learners. So I think about, there's a story someone told me of asking an intern to go bring them 50 sheets of copy paper. And like, I don't know about you, but like, my first instinct was like, you go to the ream of paper and then you count out 50 sheets of paper. And the intern brought them back and they were warm. And the manager was confused, but they had gone to the copier and pressed 50 and just had 50 blank sheets of paper come out, right? So like, the learning and the resourcefulness, I think, is really, really strong with this generation. They're much more values driven than I think some of us were, but I think many of us are becoming. And I think that is because they've watched many of us in the last 50 years of our industry existing, and their understanding of business history. So many people have given their life to their jobs and committed to that grind, and from that experiment, millennials and Gen Z have seen those folks are not any healthier. They're
Mhm.
not any happier. A lot of them aren't any wealthier because of that commitment to the grind.
Mhm.
And so I think they see that and they're going to try a different experiment, which includes a little more balance, which
Right.
includes a little more values alignment. And I don't know how it'll go for them, but I'm curious to see what their experiment yields in terms of results.
Mhm. Absolutely.
I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect too, because it's just what everybody says, right? Everybody says that they're this generation. Everybody says this, but it's like, if you really think that, are you asking those questions proactively or preemptively during
Yeah.
your interview or screening process before you even start to make these like judgments, you know, when a candidate comes into the process?
Well, and how many of these young folks are they talking to? Like, again, this is where,
One, and then
yeah,
that's
I'm
their
always like,
impression.
yeah, one candidate that you met with that happened to fit this stereotype that you've decided is what a millennial or a Gen Z candidate looks like go hang out at a college. I'm serious that like there's the UC Davis Women in Business group invites me back most years to come talk about something. And every year, especially as I get older, I'm like, holy crap, like they're so much cooler than I am. Like they know about all the AI stuff before it comes out. They're like sending handwritten thank you notes to me, right? Where I'm just like, oh my God, at 21 years old, I had no idea. They look professional. They follow up with these amazing questions. Like if you go hang out with successful groups of young people, I
Right.
think you will quickly realize we're pretty wrong about those myths.
Yes. Yes. That's why there's an interview process, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody's the right fit. We don't
No.
need blanket statements, but we can definitely dig in and see. So if in financial services, the primary space we typically recruit in, usually, or what most people recognize, is commission base, which requires a lot of buy-in. And so that's where it might be a little bit of a difference with the generations. But do you have an insight of how Gen Z is finding work in our field in financial services?
Yeah, there's a few trends here. I think one thing is if they are hearing about financial services at the college level, most of those professors are a little jaded about our industry. And so they're pushing folks to the fee-only RIA structures, right? Which I don't think is bad, but they're missing that there's a whole landscape of roles in the industry and structures in the industry, right? So that's one thing. Having to combat that is important to me. It's why we continue to go out and speak to folks at the college level, is to educate on that. So that's a challenge because there's things about that space that they don't understand when they go into it as well. Some of the other things about how they're finding work, I think that the folks that I talk to, they come to me or some of my peers. Lindsay Lewis is another one. We are co-chairs for the Next-Gen Taskforce at the American College. We go out and speak to young people at the college level too. They do come back to us and ask us questions. So I'll say they're looking for those resources that can help to be matchmakers for them and understand their values and the culture that they're looking for in a team and help match them to that right type of role. So I know we end up talking to a lot of those folks and connecting them places. The thing I always recommend to them as how they can find a good fit is LinkedIn is a super powerful tool. The folks who have listened to me and this advice have 100% of the time found a job, but to go on and search on LinkedIn, financial advisor in San Diego, California, and just send a message to them. Hey, I'm thinking about getting into the profession. I'm looking to interview a handful of professionals like you and understand how you got in and what you like about it. And like, again, 100% of the time when somebody has followed this advice, they've interviewed several advisors and then one of them offers them a job. And the way that they've approached this, they've gotten to know them and it works really well. So I think there's been a lot of success with that sort of bumping around to try to find that right match, as opposed to the traditional job board sorts of situations.
Because it's surprising to me coming from somewhere where I've in the past only recruited for commission based and only recruited for the entrepreneur type of financial advisor. And now being in the RA space or a salary based financial advisor, CFP, that person's like, I'm not a prospector. I don't want to build my own business. I'm okay making the same dollar amount, maybe some bonuses each year. And I'm like, that's almost like it's the same career. You're doing the same thing. You're just going a different approach. But I'm like, I didn't know that when I became an advisor before I got into recruiting, that there's this whole other world out there. And then you think about banking, you think about all this. And I'm like, if you're in finance in college and you're even taking a stab at wanting to be a financial advisor, we need to be able to get this information, right? Because each person's so different. The entrepreneur financial advisor is very different.
Oh yeah. You've heard me or seen me draw out the spectrum of opportunities before, or no? I can include that in our show notes too. Every candidate that I ever meet with, and I still do it with experienced advisors, it's a tool I give to teams. We draw out the spectrum of opportunities in the industry. And so if I'm sitting with a candidate, I'm going to explain, high risk, high reward, low risk, low reward on the other side. And there's everything in between, right? High risk, high reward. We've got those ownership, entrepreneurial, developing business, high creative control. On the other side, we've got captive. You're an employee, you probably are in a structure of some sort like a bank that's got a very rigid sort of set of things that you have to do. It's great. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then everything in between that, right? We can put banks and wirehouses and regional BDs and independent broker dealers and RIAs on this spectrum. And it is an educational tool they've never seen before typically. And so one, this is super helpful to the candidates, right? Because it puts all that into perspective as they start to interview at these different places. Two, for the teams that use this, it differentiates them from all the other teams that are trying to recruit this person because they're providing this education and value to that, up and coming financial professional. And it's really helped us to align candidates with the right type of advisor role. So we do with the teams we work with the same spectrum idea. We do it as an assessment. And there's a series of questions we ask that actually aligns an advisor with a type of role, right? A servicing advisor role, a para advisor role, somebody who's more like a junior associate, somebody who's that true entrepreneurial hunter, and everything in between. And that's been really critical to helping us get them in the right role and then keep them on that team.
I love that.
Yeah, that is helpful.
Super helpful.
Earlier the better, right?
Yes.
And of course you change as a person, you grow, right? Once you get into a role,
Move along. Yeah.
The prospecting is not what I want to do, but I love putting a plan together.
Yep. No, you can move along that spectrum either direction.
I also feel like right now too, there's such a huge opportunity with transfer wealth to the different generations that a lot of these teams that we're speaking to, they have so many clients that they just can't handle them. So this is an awesome opportunity for newer, recent college grads, early 20s to come in and really learn the business versus having to build it. Yes. And that's just such a huge opportunity that it's really exciting for them too, versus having all of that stress of only building it yourself, which there's still opportunities like that for sure.
Yep.
Which are still great. But again, having a variety is really good.
Absolutely.
So in your opinion then, Alanah, when you're sitting here and thinking about Gen Z, because that's obviously what our podcast is about today, right? We've been talking about it so much, but very curious as to understand on the Generation Z side, have you seen them approach sales differently or have any unique strategies to approaching, when they are trying to build a clientele or just, get in front of more people? Anything that you've seen?
I love this. Yeah, we do sales training for financial advisors that are on a team, and we call it our authentic selling. Because I think this is really critical every time, and especially amongst young women at the college level. Like sales is just like a really nasty word, and they associate it with that sleazy car
Oh.
salesman, right? Like that's what we think of when we think of sales. Or if you look at every financial advisor that's represented in movies, they are a crook. They're, they've got hookers and blow, and I don't know if I can say it on your podcast, but like there's just like crazy stuff happening. They're not good people. They're like conning somebody at some point in this process. So, breaking down that idea that we have to do sales in this same way that the old finance guys did, which all of those sales and training processes were designed by somebody before Google, right? So like the world has changed, as we've said. The 3.8 cold call attempts is now 8, like that's double. Like sales has changed. Social media has changed sales. So yes, they do have a different approach. It is, in our opinion, more important about being authentic, although there's certainly some process around sales that matters. The way that they are approaching folks is definitely about identifying an ideal client that they want to work with, somebody they have a connection to. My dad's a roofing contractor. For me, that might be construction professionals, that I've got a story around that, right? And then figuring out, well, what's keeping those construction professionals up at night? Where do they hang out? What education and information do they need? And how do I put that out constantly for them in a way that's valuable, entertaining, authentic to me, to connect with those folks and really solve their problems? And so that ends up being a lot of what we work on with them. There's still the same, structure everybody wants of like, we've got our Aid Inc. process where we're going to go through the, introduction and demonstrating and negotiating and closing, and that all still exists. We're still having to have a high level of activity in terms of calls or messages or whatever. Again, that's the same, and systematizing that, but the methods are a little different. It might be LinkedIn messages instead of calls. It might be seminars instead of handwritten notes. It could be any of those things versus what it used to be.
Right. What are your thoughts on, there's still several companies out there that when they're hiring a brand new financial advisor, so on the entrepreneurial side, not on the team side, they still want them to come with a Project 200 list. Do you feel like that's still beneficial? Just very curious on your input.
Do you want like my really honest opinion on that? Okay.
Yeah.
Because anyone that I work with, right, when we're building their business plan and their how to find clients plan, we're going to figure out, who are you? What's important to you? What are your values, right? Like, let's understand your brands. What connection do you have to some groups that you might want to help, right? And then again, where does that group hang out? What's keeping them up at night? How do we get in front of them with educational and valuable information? As a secondary or tertiary part of that plan, we may have them develop a list of their personal contacts, right? That might be a part of the plan. When we're doing that, though, we've already got a relationship with them. They've already got a solid marketing strategy and a direction that they're going in with it. It's not a part of the interview process. And I really worry for these companies that are doing this in the interview process of like, how classist, how exclusionary can you be, that like you only want people who have a vast network of rich people that they might know, right? When we have access, and again, this generation taking social selling and putting lighter fluid on it, they have access to build networks and connections really quickly through the social networks that they have access to. So you don't just have to know a lot of people or know a lot of rich people anymore.
And I would love to know the transition of the Project 200 into somebody's actual first year production, right? Like, what does Google say about that?
I mean, I think what happens, unfortunately, for all the same reasons that we didn't want to hire this person because their email was casual or they showed up in flats, is that person's then going to get on the phone and say silly stuff to their friends and family. And then they're not going to be successful because they don't know how to do sales yet. They don't know how to nurture this relationship in a way that is valuable to that person that leads to the sale ultimately. So it's like, on the front end, you thought they were too immature and unprofessional and, Gen Z to be hireable, but then you send them out there just completely cold and blind, calling their buddies, hoping that capital that they have, the relationship capital that they have is going to lead to insurance sales. Like I don't know. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Do you think that it's more, because I think the way that we've been looking at for a long time is that the world has changed and we haven't really taught that new generation how to acclimate to us, but maybe is it really our industry needs to learn how to acclimate to the new generation and be able to kind of grow with them, not mold them into what we've done for so long?
I can respond to that with this. According to our Cerulli data from last year, we were almost at a net negative number of financial advisors. So if we want to continue to grow as an industry, they're not going to adapt. Like they've already got all the information we just talked about.
Right.
And so I do think it is on us if we want our industry to continue to grow and uphold the legacy that we've been building, we have to probably meet them halfway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel when we talk to clients and they ask us to hire advisors, the pushback without really being pushback that sometimes we get on, like, maybe we don't do the Project 200. Maybe we ask a little bit more about why they want this role. What's the impact? Like we try to help guide that. And some of you are like, well, if they don't do it, they don't do it. And you're like, okay,
well, those folks are missing out on great talent. I can tell you that. So I think there will be some natural selection there that takes care of those teams.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that too is, because we've experienced that, like Morgan had mentioned.
Yeah.
Part of it is, again, changing something that they've been doing for so long, and that change is just met with a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
A lot of suggestions that we've made to our clients is up with a business plan, not necessarily a list of people that you can go through, because then one of the most common complaints of a new advisor is, I already ran through all these names.
Mm-hmm.
It's so quick. So if you don't really understand that purpose, the values driven and the interests, it's going to be consistently hard just to keep adding names to those lists. Right. So, I think that that's extremely important to adapt to this generation and understand that they learn differently too, and they can approach things differently, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other thought, and I agree with all of that, is like, I'm not opposed to Project 200 or 100 or whatever. That's a leg of our marketing plan. That's a leg of our prospecting plan and that business plan ultimately. But like, how lazy are we that that's the only thing that we would give them when we have all these other tools that they could use? Like, it makes me question all the time, like when we're unwilling to change, do we really want them to be successful then? Because if we do, we would not just give them this one little arrow in their quiver of the people that they know or happen to know. We'd want them to have all these other ways that they could develop business, which we know work.
Well, and a lot of that too, Alanah, is they're like, well, but it has worked. And I'm like, yes, but look at your retention from the Generation Z and even some millennial, where they're in the first year, people are leaving, or even with, let's say the first 4 years, let's talk about that. Retention is still on average like 16%.
Yeah.
Is not good. We can do better. We absolutely can do better. And I think that's part of that, learning how to actually prospect for the business versus just writing a name list down. And again, we've given that advice as well to many of our clients. Some of them have done it, which is great. And they've started to see a big difference. But, you know, for those listening to us today, hopefully you can go back and evaluate, especially when you're looking to bring on a brand new person to start their own business from scratch. It takes a little bit more than a name list or a few market surveys out there. We got to teach them how to build a business for sure.
100%, and give them all the tools to do that. And I understand, and I credit the folks, it did work, right? That's all we know is what worked for us. But the world has changed, all the examples we've given. Why would we not want to take a more modern approach? Like, you don't use an abacus anymore to count, you use your calculator. Forcing somebody to only use the abacus would be a little asinine. So
Meeting them halfway, exactly what you said, right? Can there be a compromise to do a little bit of both, right? Still include it, but include something else.
I mean, we're doing it for our clients. Clients are getting better technology. Clients are getting better, you know, planning tools. Clients are doing this. You do it for advisors.
100%.
Great.
I can recruit. I don't do technology, so.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Alanah. We think that this will be extremely valuable for our listeners, for the Talent Talks community as it continues to grow. And we'll certainly have your contact information in the notes here, just in case anybody has questions around that or wants to connect with you. Please do. Alanah is a phenomenal resource. And the more people that you have in your network, the better. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.